So, what is Bitcoin? How do you tell that to people? How do you tell your grandma? How do you tell people on the streets? And for people maybe that are first learning about Bitcoin, they're going to look at you like you're a crazy man and that this thing could actually change consciousness, sovereignty. Because if you're new to this, it's hard to imagine that something they can't see or touch, it has the power. So, how do you start that conversation with people?
Well, I'll give you my 30-second elevator pitch for Bitcoin that I think is useful because, I've spent 5 years thinking about this almost exclusively. And it's not just, that sounds like crazy. People are like, what do you mean you're thinking about just Bitcoin? It's not just Bitcoin. It's all of this history we've been exploring, right? The relationship of man and money and property across history and how it's transformed our socioeconomic systems and sovereignty, et cetera. My 30-second pitch on Bitcoin is that it is simply an insurance policy on central banking or fiat currency. And the more dollars that central banks produce, the more valuable that policy becomes. So I think this is a very simple introduction to Bitcoin. To go a step deeper, we could say Bitcoin is a digital disruptor to gold, as we've laid out here. To go maybe a step deeper, we could say that Bitcoin is the separation of money and state. So again, as we've said throughout all of history, the state has wielded its monopoly on force to monopolize money as a means of economizing their control over human beings. But in Bitcoin, we have the first money or property right that's independent of the state. Again, we define a property as this relationship between owner and asset. So in the physical world, if you're going to own your house, you need an enforcer of some kind, right? There has to be some physical enforcement of your relationship to that house. But with Bitcoin, it's just an informational property, right? And the enforcement is done by the Bitcoin mining ecosystem, right? There's a whole microcosm of capitalism called Bitcoin mining, where computers are competing to solve this puzzle, allocating the energy expenditure to security of the network. And it's really ingenious, actually. So the larger Bitcoin becomes, in terms of market capitalization, the more secure its network becomes. So you can think of it kind of like a safe that gets harder to crack the more money you put into it, something like that. And I would also say that, if people will follow my work to the bottom, it's like, again, this is why I go, what is money first? You have to get to those services that money renders to you. That's the bottom answer to that question. What is money? It's like, what is money? It's divisibility, durability, recognizability, portability, scarcity. These are the properties you need from a good or asset in the world as money. So in that sense, Bitcoin has virtually perfected the properties of money. So if we look at divisibility, each Bitcoin is divisible into 100 million subunits called sats. The code can be updated in a backwards compatible way that increases that divisibility. So if that were ever insufficient for economic activity, as if Bitcoin ate all the money in the world and all of a sudden a loaf of bread would, cost half a sat, Bitcoin's code can be upgraded to accommodate more divisibility. So it's perfected divisibility effectively. Bitcoin is just distributed information. So it's stored everywhere and nowhere, as people like to say. Every node that runs Bitcoin has an entire history of transactions. Like I don't need, and this is the ethos in Bitcoin. They say, don't trust, verify. When you run your own node, you don't need to trust anyone. Talk about trust minimization. It's like you have the whole verified recorded history of the entire blockchain, the whole history of transactions locally. Right. And so does everyone else. So no one can cheat, right? It's all these computers checking each other's work. And so in that way, I think Bitcoin is perfected durability. Again, durability is just the persistence of money across time. So the analogy I like to use here is something like the Bible. What is the Bible? Well, it's a book. Not really. Like you can destroy a single Bible, a single book, but no one can destroy the Bible, right? Like it's everywhere and nowhere. It's been printed bazillion times, and it's distributed information that's embedded in global human consciousness, right? You can't get rid of that. Bitcoin's similar, right? It's everywhere and nowhere. It's in code. You can back it up in any number of formats, and many people do to protect the network. Clearly, Bitcoin has perfected portability because it's just digital information. It can be moved at the speed of light. Can't get much faster than that. Recognizability is how easy is it to authenticate the money, to verify it is what it is, and with gold got the name sound money, actually, which you've probably heard. From the sound it would make when you drop gold from a certain height. That would indicate if it was gold or if it was copper plated with gold. So there were these old techniques for saying the authenticity of gold. That was related to its recognizability property. And with Bitcoin, again, if you're running a node, not only can you verify that all the Bitcoin you're being sent is authentic, but you can also audit the total supply. We've never had anything like this. You can just check, make sure there's only 21 million, and everyone can do the same. So everyone's auditing everyone else. And then finally, as I think we've banged on a lot today, scarcity is very important, right? The reliable, predictable nature of the supply of money is really important for its store of value function over time. If there is someone that can violate the supply of money, as central banks do in perpetuity, then they have every incentive in the world, the most powerful incentive in the world, to do so. So that was the game theoretic process that drove us towards gold as the asset most resistant to inflation or debasement. But with Bitcoin, we have something even more radically new. And I argue that, Bitcoin itself is clearly an invention. It's man-made. But I argue in a lot of my writing that it has led us to the discovery of absolute scarcity. We've never had anything like this in history. Everything has been relatively scarce. Even with gold, if we could, magically flip a switch and have everyone in the world go out and start mining more gold, we could get a lot more gold above ground much quickly. So even gold is just relatively scarce to how much labor and energy we're allocating towards it. But with Bitcoin, we have the first fixed supply asset in human history, and that it has a fixed, auditable, unchangeable supply of 21 million. So no matter how much energy we allocate towards Bitcoin mining, we cannot change that. And this is the genius of Bitcoin too, is that it has this algorithmic feature called the difficulty estimate. So the harder you try to mine Bitcoin, every 2 weeks, the algorithm basically adapts to how much effort's being allocated towards its production, such that it always adheres to this fixed and diminishing supply curve towards 21 million. So this is really mind blowing. It's almost like we've created a living money, right? This money adapts to our action. When we try to mine more of it, it becomes harder to mine. If we try to mine less of it, it becomes easier to mine. So it's constantly adapting and improvising itself to our action. It's something that's responsive to human action. So an asset that is actually responding to how we respond to it, it's a very interesting thing to think about. But the punchline is, with absolute scarcity, is that it's the perfect store of value, right? If you own 1,000 Bitcoin, you have a guaranteed 1,000 of a possible 21 million that there will ever be. We cannot say that for any asset historically. Never before could you own a guaranteed fraction of the total supply of any asset, including gold, historically. So this makes Bitcoin the ultimate money.